To me, it seems kind of deceitful, the accommodation idea. If God is God, and he's the one who inspired people to write the Bible, why would he have them write things that he knew were perfectly, wrong? I mean, that doesn't make sense.
Okay, so for example, to clarify a little bit, give a specific example for...
Well, what you were just talking about, the science of the day, you were basically saying is that we should expect that this so-called science of the day, which it wasn't true science anyway, would appear in the Bible because the Bible was written so long ago by people who didn't know any better. But yet, at the same time, you want to claim that it was inspired by God, who is all-knowing.
Okay, so for example, it says day 1 God did this, day 2 God did that, right?
Right.
And so you're saying, why is that not? Why would God use that?
Right.
So one of the things I brought up is maybe one answer might be is our culture is so different. We're scientific minded. We want to get right to the chase. And in Hebrew thought, there could have been more of a poetry thing in there. Like I said before, there's a structure to it. There's a poetry kind of structure where it was tofu and bofu, the Hutu, and so tohu and bohu, and so basically it's just kind of a poetry thing. The same thing with Noah's Ark, the story there. You can see the poetry in there.
Right.
And they didn't know any different either. So
So, well, I just, from my point of view, in fact, the Bible's my favorite book. I love the Bible. I read it all the time. But I'm willing to accept the Bible as a work of literature, even as a work of religious literature. But that's where I draw the line. I will not go over that line and say, but it's more than that. It's actually the inspired Word of God. Because of things like this, I cannot say that it is the inspired Word of God.
Because your expectation is that it's got to be like modern standards.
Well, no, it just has to be honest, and that to me is not honest. I mean, God, if God is omnipotent and all-knowing and benevolent, why would he do that? I didn't withhold any information from my kids, but as they got older, they were able to understand it more and more and more. But that doesn't mean I purposely would lie to them. I didn't do that either.
Speaking of expectations, I think it would be a reasonable expectation of God that he could speak down to people.
Accommodation, yeah.
Accommodation. Then you also use the words like speak down to people without deviating much from what is sound knowledge. It just only seems like, yes, maybe a little bit of deviation, but some significantly amazingly close parallels to the sound information that is today. Because if you look at when the last part of the Bible ended and then where modern science began, isn't there like a 500-year gap?
Well, there's more than that.
1,500-year gap?
No, it was
Galileo.
Modern science really didn't start until probably the 17th century.
So all I'm saying is that if modern science started at the 17th century when we started seeing that sound knowledge that we're referring to, if the Bible could at least have done this really extraordinary correlation, not perfect, but extraordinary correlation, talking down to people correlation, I would be impressed, but we don't see anything close on many issues.
Yes, well, so what I said here is that they use the science of the day. They had their understanding of how the planets move and stuff like that. And so the message that people are sinners and separated from God, that message came through with their understanding.
And that terrifically argues that it is therefore definitely man-made and there is no God element in it. That would be what that would argue.
Yeah, I have to say that I think the theory of accommodation is actually pretty broken. It's an attractive theory, prima facie, but there's a couple problems with it. The points that have been made, I think, already are excellent. Accommodation doesn't mean assimilation. It doesn't mean that you don't have content, that you don't have excess content that isn't understandable by the individual being spoken to. There's always something. If you speak from a superior position, you carry that information into everything you say. And the thing is, we don't see that here. We don't find that the statements of the Bible are, oh my gosh, they were so true. We understand them so much better than the ancients did. because the ancients had blinders on. But really, we really do understand that not just that the earth was made in 7 days, but now we've got all this detail about how the earth was made in 7 days, so on and so forth. We don't see that. What we see is a completely different paradigm.
Well, see, you're also looking at the science, though. You're not looking at the theology. So you're looking at Genesis and you're judging the science of it.
Okay, and that's the other thing, is that you can't have any content in a book that's supposed to be a book of instruction. You can't have any content which isn't important. You can't just throw extra stuff in there and say, well, that's just so that I can communicate. If it's just to communicate, it also informs everything that comes out of it. Every piece of information has the potential of informing everything else. So the idea of God being up there is a profound concept. It's based on human notions of authority and height and superiority associated with highness, and so on and so forth. And instead, the cosmology we have is completely different. Instead, we're shrunk to an infinitesimal part of the total universe. You know, if that was really the truth, if that was really something that, you know, that was out there, why doesn't the theology reflect those truths? The theology reflects an ancient point of view. And
well, I got two comments. It sounds like you think it should have been done, God should have done it differently. Instead of using the science of their day, he should have used what's the real modern science, which would have confused them, right?
No,
I mean, if they all thought the planets and everything went around the Earth, and God said, "Oh, in the beginning, you know, the Earth is going around the sun," they would go, "What? What's that?"
No, just some basic, really, really basic fundamentals from which spring the things that modern science has discovered through its technology, which would have been impossible back then. Just some really fundamental concepts.
But see, again, you're looking for science, though, instead of theology.
Here's the simplest way to put it. The situation you're describing is no different from the book having been man-made. The product doesn't look any different.
Except for the theological message. I mean, you could look at what are the man-made messages from other ancient books. They're a lot different, it seems like.
But if the science is wrong, you're automatically going to say, well, how do we know the theology's not wrong?
Was the creation story appropriated at all from a Babylonian? I mean, was it totally new, or was it a retelling of something? Am I hoping?
Yeah, from what I understand.
Because I've already answered those.
Yeah, from what I understand, it was very similar to, there was another creation story like that, where somebody was sliced in half and...
There's several from ancient.
Yeah.
But is it like a response to, I mean, is it refer to it, or in some way?
Well, actually, that's what somebody once said, is that basically it cleaned up a pagan version of a story. I mean, there's the pagan version of the story that's out there, and it's kind of messed up a little bit, so this kind of cleaned it up and made God, or, you know, displayed God in the right way, how he's righteous, and, you know, there's a thing with sin versus a pagan story where his gods are just bad-tempered and irritable and stuff like that, you know, and just doing wacky things and
but would someone at that time,
I can't say.
Would someone at that time recognize it as a retelling or a threat to the other story? I mean, would they have been comparing them?
Yeah, I think they probably would have saw it as a cleaned-up version, I think.
Well, see, just the fact that you're saying it's a cleaned-up version tells me something about your perception of it. How do you know it's a cleaned-up version? Maybe the pagan version was the clean version and they dirtied it. You know, I mean, there's no frame of reference. We can't know if this version is a better version.
Well, see, like the other versions, there's these gods fighting, and one of the gods got killed, and they sliced her in half, and then, you know, that...
But I can show you examples of the biblical God doing things like that, too.
Not gods fighting, though. I mean,
yeah, you better read Judges, and you better read some of Exodus and some of those stories about conquering the land. God did a lot of killing.
No, but I was talking about different gods fighting each other versus, I mean, the Bible talks about one God in heaven.